Hello and welcome to another NFL Draft Scouting Report video from Pigskin Prodigies for the 2018 NFL Draft. The focus of today's film breakdown will be Louisville quarterback Lamar Jackson. So jumping right in, starting with the measurables, Jackson is 6'2", which is pretty average for an NFL quarterback in terms of height. When you get into weight, he's a little bit lean. He's only 216 pounds, so that might cause some teams and some evaluators to be concerned about his durability, but he's never been injured in college, so I don't worry about that too much. I don't think his injury risk is any greater than many of the other quarterbacks in this draft class, especially when you compare him to like Josh Rosen and Josh Allen, who have had injuries before despite being bigger. So to knock Lamar Jackson for potentially being injury prone and not those guys who have actually been injured, I think is completely unfair. So I'm not going to really worry too much about Lamar's durability because it's hard to predict injuries and he's never been injured before. So getting into the actual skills of his game, starting with arm strength, Lamar Jackson has good arm strength. He has a strong enough arm to make every required NFL throw. Doesn't have elite arm strength, I don't think, but that's not really a concern. He can make all the throws, as I said. He can fit the ball into windows at every level of the field, and he can make those drive throws from the opposite hash. So has enough arm strength to make all the throws, checks that box, and teams won't be concerned with his arm strength at all, I don't think. So getting into the most important trait that I look for in quarterbacks, accuracy and ball placement. Lamar Jackson's accuracy, I think, is a little bit underrated. He's not the most consistently precise passer, I will grant you, but when you look at his general accuracy, I think he's okay overall. When you break it down by level of the field, he has good short accuracy. According to Ian Wharton at NFL Film Study on Twitter, Lamar Jackson threw a catchable pass on 74% of his throws in the 0 to 10 yard range, which was, I think, 22nd in his database of 50 prospects over the last 5 or so years. So it's pretty good throwing short. Then you get into intermediate accuracy, and he threw 65% with uncatchable passes, I guess. Threw a catchable pass on 65% of his attempts in 2017. So that's another good mark in the 11 to 19 range of the field. And I think he was 11th. So, yeah, has pretty good intermediate accuracy as well, especially between the hashes. Then you get into accuracy, throwing deep. This is where he was least consistent. Only threw a catchable pass on 38% of his attempts in 2017. Does show the ability to stretch the field at times, but like many of these quarterbacks in the draft class, and like a lot of college quarterback prospects, he's not consistent throwing the deep ball. So that's something that he can continue to work on once he gets to the next level. Other notes about accuracy: Jackson has solid accuracy on the move, especially rolling to his right. But yeah, just solid there. Maybe you'd like to see him be better there because of his athleticism, but he's definitely solid as a passer on the move. Not great though. And lastly, a couple other notes. I think Lamar's inconsistencies with accuracy show themselves mostly on outside the numbers throws, where his ball placement is less consistent. Seems to make receivers work a little too hard on drive throws outside the numbers. So, and I think that's tied to mechanics too. So with improved footwork and maybe you alter his release a little bit, I think you could improve that somewhat. And lastly, when it comes to accuracy and ball placement, Jackson displays good touch. He can vary ball speeds, which is important. So he can throw accurately when he has to drive the ball and put a lot of velocity on it, but he can also change it up and throw it with feathery soft touch when he needs to. So overall, yeah, I think Lamar Jackson's accuracy is adequate. It's not great, but I think it's good enough when you combine that with his elite athleticism. And like I said, he's pretty consistent throwing over the middle of the field between the hashes. So if you build your scheme kind of around passes that travel in that area of the field, I think you can maximize Lamar's potential. So then getting into the next trait that I evaluate quarterback prospects on, and that is field vision and decision making, or mental processing as I call it. So that's like decision making, pre and post snap, being able to see the field and make adjustments if necessary. And this is an area where I think Lamar is pretty good overall. I like his decision making in general. I think he's one of the better decision makers in this class. Takes care of the football, doesn't make a lot of risky throws in general. So I like that about Lamar. In Bobby Petrino's offense that he ran at Louisville, Jackson showed an ability to get through progressions, showed the ability to move through full field progressions at times, and seems to process fairly quickly, so I like that about him. Can get through progressions, can also use his eyes to manipulate defenders and create throwing windows when he needs to. So I like that about him as well. Shows the ability to throw with anticipation. Not the best anticipation thrower in this class, but he shows an ability to do it, and that's going to be important at the NFL level when windows are tighter, and he has to get the ball out on time and anticipate where windows will be. Let's see, also relating to mental processing, Lamar Jackson is really good at finding his hot read when he's blitzed, seems to be very aware and understand his protection schemes well. So shows advanced tendencies in the mental processing department as a whole. In terms of pre-snap adjustments, Jackson, most of those came from the sideline for Jackson, so that might be an adjustment. Didn't typically have to make his own side adjustments, so that could be something that he'll possibly have to work on at the NFL level, but that's something that he can develop once he gets into the league. And then lastly, my last note on mental processing, I think Lamar, he shows the ability to throw with timing and anticipation, as I said, but sometimes I think the ball comes out a little bit late. So I think he could continue to work on throwing with timing, and that would really elevate his game. Okay, getting into the next category that I look for when evaluating quarterback prospects, and that is mechanics. I think this is the biggest issue that Lamar Jackson has, because it leads to some inconsistencies with accuracy. So first of all, he's got a quick throwing motion. He has that kind of wrist flick, Michael Vick style motion that allows him to get the ball out quickly, but it can affect his ball placement negatively, I believe. And when you get into the lower body mechanics, I think this is the biggest issue that displays itself in Lamar Jackson's game, especially when he's working in tight pockets and he doesn't have a lot of room to operate from. This is where you see him, I guess, his mechanics can break down when he has less room to work with, and he doesn't always follow through fully on his throws, and that can cause some of his passes to sail. And this was especially noteworthy in the Mississippi State game this year and the Clemson game earlier in the year. So that's the biggest, I think, concern with Lamar Jackson. He needs to do a better job of maintaining his mechanics when he's working in a tight pocket and there's pressure around him. He needs to do a better job of maintaining his mechanics and making sure he follows through and doesn't compromise his base when he doesn't need to. Throws from a narrow base a lot of times, and that can cause his passes to have less velocity, and also can affect his ball placement adversely as well. So that's another thing that I think NFL teams will want to work with him on, widening out his base to increase velocity and increase ball placement. One other note about Lamar Jackson is on deep throws, he has a tendency to overstride at times, and sometimes he'll lock out his lead leg, and that will take some velocity off of his passes. So, yeah, I think if he can improve his mechanics, he could become considerably more consistent as a passer, and that would be the key to unlocking his potential, I think. So, yeah, I think that pretty much sums up my thoughts on Jackson's mechanics. So let's look into the next category that I look for when studying quarterback prospects, and that is pocket presence and pocket mobility. I think that Lamar Jackson generally shows poise in the pocket, doesn't typically panic and drop his eyes or try to escape the pocket at the first sign of pressure. I think he does a pretty good job of keeping his eyes downfield when he feels pressure, and that allows him to extend plays well and kind of stay in structure of the offense and not allow the timing of plays to break down. So I think that's an important quality and something that Lamar Jackson has shown he can do well. So looking at his pocket mobility, I would say that Lamar has shown a feel for maneuvering within the pocket, but he could become more consistent at it. He does like to step up in the pocket, which I like, after he reaches the top of his drop. But sometimes he'll walk into sacks when he steps up too far in the pocket, and so that shows that his pocket feel is still developing. But I think he showed improvement from last year, and probably the year before as well. I didn't go back to his freshman film, but definitely improved there from last year, and probably can continue to improve there. But that's another area where I think he could improve at, improving his ability to navigate the pocket. But I think he shows pretty good awareness and feel for pressure, but could do a better job of maneuvering within the pocket, I would say. So that's another area that he can continue to work on, but he's definitely shown growth there and possibly has even more room to grow in that area. So I think I hit on all of the essentials with pocket presence. So let's get into Lamar Jackson's best trait of all, his mobility and athleticism and ability to extend plays. Lamar Jackson is quite possibly the greatest athlete to ever play quarterback. I know Michael Vick was a great athlete too, but I think Lamar is even more shifty than Michael Vick was. I don't know if he's quite as fast in a straight line, but he's not that far off, and he's, I think, even more shifty than Michael Vick was. So obviously he's a rare athlete at the quarterback position. He's extremely dangerous as a runner. He can, whether on designed runs or broken plays, Lamar Jackson can just kill you with his speed and ability as a runner. He can turn potential sacks into 30-yard gains, and you can't say that about any other quarterback in this draft class. That's unique to him. He's a unique prospect, and his ability as an athlete is unparalleled as far as quarterbacks are concerned. So Jackson's mobility is really, I think, the biggest part of his appeal. It's one of the reasons that I really like Lamar Jackson, and one of the reasons that I'm really intrigued by him. His dual threat ability. His ability as a runner puts so much pressure on a defense. It's harder to run man coverage because if your receivers are running down the field, then you have wide open space for the quarterback to take off, and Lamar Jackson can pick up big chunks of yardage in a hurry. If you play man, he can burn you that way. But he's also good at tearing up zone coverages too. I think he has pretty good anticipation and is very comfortable working the middle of the field. So he can tear apart your zone defenses too. And another thing that I like about his mobility is that it gives you a lot of flexibility with play calling in the red zone. You can run, designed quarterback runs. You can run read option, and that opens up possibilities, I think, and gives your offensive coordinator or whoever your play caller is a lot of flexibility. And another thing is with his immobility, even if he's not the most consistent passer, he can still create huge explosive plays with his mobility and his arm talent. So that's why I'm willing to live with some of his variance as a passer, because he can create those explosive plays with his legs or his arm. So that's a little more forgivable, I think. His inconsistencies as a passer, I think he's good enough as a passer to be a good quarterback when you combine that with his athleticism. So that's why I'm high on Lamar Jackson, pretty much. I think that gives a pretty good summary of my reasoning there. So then lastly, I look at intangibles when evaluating quarterbacks. This is one of the more important qualities, and can be one of the more difficult ones to assign a grade to for quarterbacks for me, because I've never met these guys. I don't really know what they're like in person, because I've only seen interviews, and I can only go off of what I've heard about them. But doing the best that I could with what I could find, I think Lamar Jackson has really good intangibles. He was a 3-year starter, carried his team to a 22-13 record, a team that wasn't very good. So I like that about him. I'm pretty sure he has a strong work ethic, because he's made dramatic improvements to his game in each year as a starter. So I'm pretty sure Lamar Jackson has a great work ethic. I think you can infer that from the improvements that he's made. So I like that about him as well. He's regarded as a high character guy. I've listened to a number of interviews from him, and he seems really humble. And I've looked at post game interviews too, and he doesn't really point fingers at all. He takes the blame a lot of times, even if things weren't his fault. He takes responsibility for them and shows good leadership qualities, I believe. Other things that I like about Lamar is that, as I kind of alluded to, he elevated a poor supporting cast at Louisville and never complained. Just took the team on his shoulders and did the best with what he had. And yeah, he's just clean off the field. No character concerns with him. No off the field questions. So I like that about Lamar as well. You don't have to worry about him off the field. He will conduct himself as a professional off the field as well. So I don't think you have to worry about him at all when it comes to off the field conduct. Okay, finally, that sums up my thoughts on Lamar Jackson overall in terms of traits. So getting into his grade, I value Lamar Jackson as a late first-round grade, but I only have, I think, 16 first-round grades at the moment, so he's top 12 to 15 on my draft board, and I would take him in the top 5 personally if I needed a quarterback. As far as an NFL comparison for Lamar Jackson is concerned, it's hard to pin one player down to compare him to, because he's really unique. I've heard the Michael Vick comparisons, and I can see some of that, but I don't think that's a perfect comparison, and I don't know if there's one player that really is a perfect comparison for him. So I've decided to compare him to 2 players, and those players are Marcus Mariota and Michael Vick. If those two had a baby, I think they have some combined qualities that add up to what Lamar Jackson is and could be. Okay, so the Marcus Mariota part of that comparison is his patience and polish as a passer, and also his body frame. I think is pretty similar. Obviously, both dual threat quarterbacks. Strong decision making. Don't really force a lot of risky throws. So I think, and escapability as well, and athleticism. Even though I think Lamar Jackson is a better athlete and closer to Michael Vick as an athlete. So now I'll get into that part of the comparison. Compared to Michael Vick, pretty similar athletically. Has kind of a similar wrist flick throwing motion and great escapability and athleticism like a Michael Vick. However, in contrast to Michael Vick, Lamar is more of a pass-first quarterback. He's not a one read and run type of quarterback like Vick was, and I don't think he has quite the elite arm strength that Vick had, but has good arm strength and has kind of a similar throwing motion. So I think if you combine those 2 players and their skill sets, then you can get kind of the hybrid of those 2 kind of adds up to what Lamar Jackson is and could be. So that's my best comparison for Lamar Jackson that I've been able to think of. So yeah, that pretty much sums up my thoughts on Lamar Jackson. I think that he's the third best quarterback prospect in this draft for me, after Baker Mayfield, number 1, and Josh Rosen, number 2. After those guys, I think the next guys are more like projects. Lamar Jackson, though, is less of a project, I think, than a Sam Darnold or a Josh Allen, and I think he has more upside than either of those guys, so that's why I rank him higher than those guys. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about Lamar Jackson. I hope that you will stay tuned for the scouting report videos that I will be pumping out shortly here as we lead up to the draft. Thanks again for listening and watching, and yeah, I hope you'll stay tuned for more.